Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're going deep into learning how we do it, how our brains work, the whole deal.
Yeah, it really is fascinating.
It is. You've given me a ton of stuff to go through this time.
Hmm.
Academic papers, learning strategies, all focused on the brain.
Should be fun.
Definitely. And get this, did you know stress actually changes the physical structure of our
I
brains?
did not know that.
Yeah, and it makes it harder to learn. There's also this whole thing about learning types, three of them, each with their own strengths.
I've heard about that, yeah.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll know your own learning type, have tips to boost your brain power, and see how crazy complex learning really is.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. One of the things we have this time is this book, Die Learn Therapy.
Oh, I've heard of that one. It has some really good insights, right?
Absolutely. It starts with this powerful analogy about ski slopes.
Ski slopes.
Yeah. Imagine pristine snow, then a skier comes down, making messy tracks.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The book says that's how negative learning structures or misguided learning processes form in our brains. They become like messy tracks on a slope, making it harder for new learning to happen smoothly.
Oh, that's a great analogy. I get it. So just like those messy tracks would make it harder for other skiers, these negative learning structures can make it harder for us to learn new things effectively.
Exactly.
Hmm.
So it's not just about cramming information into our heads, but making sure the conditions are right for that information to stick. The book talks about therapists helping with this.
Like a guide, I guess?
Yeah, helping learners navigate those messy tracks and find a better path, just like a ski instructor would analyze a skier's technique and give them specific tips to improve.
Makes sense. So the therapist helps identify those negative learning patterns and guides the learner towards more effective ways of learning.
Right. And then the book gets into this whole triune brain model,
Hmm.
the reptilian brain, limbic system, neocortex.
Ah, yeah, I've heard about that.
What blew my mind was learning that the limbic system controls both emotions and memory.
Oh, wow. So that means our emotions play a role in how well we remember things.
Exactly. The more enjoyable and emotionally stimulating a learning experience is, the better we retain the information. Think about the most vivid memories you have: a wedding, the birth of a child.
Big emotional events.
Right. We remember those so clearly because of the strong emotions tied to them.
Makes you think about how to make learning more engaging and fun. Tap into those positive emotions to boost our memory.
That's exactly what the book says. Positive emotions release neurotransmitters that help our brains form stronger connections, leading to better learning and memory. And speaking of different ways to learn,
Oh, yeah, the learning types.
right, Die Learn Therapy talks about visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners. It really stretches knowing which type you are so you can learn better.
There are some pretty clear examples for each type, too, right?
Totally. Like visual learners might be amazing at fashion or recognizing faces.
Huh?
Auditory learners, they might be drawn to music or love discussions. Then you have your kinesthetic learners who thrive with movement and hands-on activities.
It's funny, when you start thinking about it, you really can see those patterns in yourself and other people, right?
Absolutely. I think everyone listening is probably already trying to figure out which one they are.
I know I am. But knowing your strengths is key to figuring out the best ways to learn. Visual learners could use mind maps or diagrams. Auditory learners might do well with lectures or podcasts. And kinesthetic learners need to get up and move, maybe build something or do an experiment.
Absolutely. But no matter what kind of learner you are, remembering what you've learned is a challenge.
For sure.
The book quotes Lynn Stern, who says paying attention is super important for learning. Sounds obvious, but how often do we actually do that?
Yeah, we skim things, zone out.
Totally. Die Learn Therapy digs into some really effective learning techniques. Repetition, connecting new information to stuff you already know, even using visual imagery.
Aren't there some specific examples of how to use those strategies too? I feel like practical examples always help me understand how to actually apply things in my life.
There are. Like making up a story to remember your grocery list, or linking new information to strong emotions to make it more memorable.
I like that. It brings the theory to life. It's not just abstract concepts. It's showing you, okay, here's how you actually do this.
Exactly. It's about giving people tools they can use, no matter what their learning style is.
For sure.
But let's not forget about sleep.
Ah, yes, sleep. Essential.
The book says it's super important for solidifying what we learn, especially REM sleep.
Interesting. Makes you wonder why that is. You wouldn't think we'd be primed for learning right before bed, would you? I mean, usually we're pretty tired by then.
Right. I thought the same thing. But think about it. Even just watching a thriller before bed can affect how you sleep because your brain's busy processing everything that happened in the movie.
Oh, that's true.
It's the same idea with learning. Info we take in right before sleep is more likely to get processed and stored during those REM cycles.
So our brains are actually working even when we're asleep.
Exactly. It's wild, right? The book also talks about how our brains can block out certain stimuli so we can focus on what's important. It has to do with this neurotransmitter called gamma-aminobutyric acid.
I'm not familiar with that one. What does it do?
It helps our brain filter out distractions. But here's the thing. People with hyperactivity often produce less of this neurotransmitter. So it's harder for them to block out all that extra noise and focus their attention.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. It's like their brains are constantly overloaded with information. It makes it much more difficult to pick out the important things and ignore the rest.
Exactly. And that leads us right into the impact of stress on learning. Learn therapy makes it very clear that stress makes it harder to learn.
Stress seems to affect everything negatively, right?
It really does. The book explains that stress actually causes physical changes in the brain that make it harder to think rationally, process emotions, and use those higher-level cognitive functions. It even affects our memory.
So stress is like putting up a roadblock on the information highway in our brains.
I like that analogy. And the book also talks about the role of certain hormones, like adrenaline and cortisol.
The stress hormones, yeah, I know those are bad news.
They mess with those delicate learning and memory processes we were talking about earlier. It all gets disrupted by stress.
Stress is the worst.
Right. And it's interesting. The book suggests that hyperactivity could actually be a way for people to burn off all that excess adrenaline caused by stress.
So instead of just being a behavioral issue, hyperactivity might be a physical response to stress.
Exactly. That's what the book is saying.
Yeah.
And it goes on to say that if you want to deal with negative learning experiences, you have to address the underlying stressors that are causing them.
That makes a lot of sense. So what kind of stressors are we talking about?
Learn therapy lists a bunch of developmental issues, nutrition, illness, media, all the pressure and expectations people face, even problems with the education system itself.
So it covers a pretty wide range, from things going on inside a person to things coming from the outside world.
Right. And it spends some time focusing on the impact of media, especially too much television, on how kids learn and grow.
That's a big topic these days.
It is. The book argues that spending hours staring at a two-dimensional screen can actually limit a child's spatial reasoning and imagination.
Because they're not interacting with the real three-dimensional world.
Exactly. And they're not moving their bodies enough, which also has a negative impact on their development.
Interesting. So less TV and more running around outside.
That's the idea. The book suggests replacing all that screen time with physical activity and play. And not just to get kids moving, but also to encourage them to use their imaginations, intuition, and social skills.
Sounds like a much healthier approach overall.
Definitely. And the book actually recommends some specific activities that are especially good for our brains. Things like walking, jogging, swimming, and gymnastics.
Makes sense. Exercise is good for both our bodies and our minds. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle: emotions. The book says that when we don't process our emotions, it can actually harm our health and make it harder to learn.
It's like carrying around all this emotional baggage that's weighing you down and making it harder to function at your best.
That's a good way to put it. And the book explains how this often starts in childhood. Kids learn to suppress their emotions because they're afraid to express them, or they're told not to show their feelings.
And that can have long-term consequences.
Definitely. It can make it harder for them to cope with stress and express themselves effectively later in life.
That's where having a supportive family environment becomes so important, right?
Absolutely. It's crucial for kids to feel safe and accepted so they can learn to acknowledge and process their emotions in a healthy way.
It's like building that emotional intelligence that the book talks about. It's not just important for our overall well-being, but it's also essential for creating optimal learning experiences.
It all ties together in the end, doesn't it?
It does.
Okay, so we've talked about the triune brain, how emotions affect learning, the importance of sleep and exercise. What's next?
Let's dive into the concept of attention. Learn therapy talked about how our brains actually block out certain stimuli to help us focus.
Like a mental filter.
Exactly. It's crucial for learning, especially in today's world where there are so many distractions competing for our attention.
It's almost impossible to avoid distractions these days. So how does this filtering process work?
The book says it has to do with certain neurotransmitters, like dopamine and norepinephrine. These chemicals help our brains decide what information is most important and worthy of our attention.
So it's not just about trying harder to focus, our brains are actually chemically wired to prioritize certain information over others.
Precisely. And this is where conditions like ADHD come into play. For people with ADHD, these neurotransmitter systems might not be working as effectively as they should be, making it much harder for them to focus and ignore distractions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
So it's not about blaming someone for not being able to concentrate. It's about understanding that there might be underlying biological factors at play.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to find strategies that support attention and focus.
So what does the book recommend?
Learn therapy suggests creating structured learning environments, breaking down tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks, and incorporating movement and breaks to give the brain a chance to recharge.
Those are all great ideas. It's about understanding how attention works and then finding ways to create learning experiences that are more engaging and effective.
Exactly. But let's not forget about motivation.
Mhm.
It's hard to learn effectively if you're not interested in what you're learning or if you're not engaged with the material.
Motivation is key. But how does that fit into all of this?
Well, motivation is closely tied to the reward system in our brains, which is heavily influenced by dopamine. Remember dopamine, the neurotransmitter we were talking about earlier.
Right. So learning experiences that trigger the release of dopamine can actually strengthen the neural pathways associated with motivation.
Exactly. The book explains how things like achieving a goal or receiving positive feedback can have this effect.
It's a positive feedback loop. Motivation fuels learning, and successful learning experiences further boost motivation.
Exactly. And this highlights the importance of setting achievable goals, celebrating small victories, and finding ways to make the learning process itself more enjoyable.
Makes sense. We've all had those moments where we get so caught up in learning something new that we completely lose track of time, right?
Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah.
like you enter this state of complete absorption where you're totally focused and everything just flows effortlessly.
Exactly. Learn therapy calls this the flow state. It's considered the ultimate learning experience because it allows us to tap into our full potential and learn effortlessly.
Sounds amazing. How do you get there?
The book suggests finding activities that challenge us just enough without being too easy or too difficult.
It's like finding that sweet spot where we're fully engaged and motivated, but not feeling overwhelmed or frustrated.
Right. That balance is key. And that sense of challenge and accomplishment is essential for driving us to learn and grow.
Makes sense. So we've talked about attention and motivation. What else does Learn therapy cover?
It delves into the importance of feedback in learning. It's not just about receiving praise or criticism, but about understanding how our actions lead to specific outcomes.
So it's about connecting the dots between our efforts and the results we get, helping us to refine our strategies and improve our performance.
Right. And the book stresses that we need both positive feedback to reinforce successful behaviors and constructive feedback to highlight areas for improvement.
It's about finding that balance between encouragement and guidance.
Exactly. Now let's switch gears and talk about memory. Learn therapy takes a deep dive into how our brains store and retrieve information.
It's amazing how much is going on in our brains that we don't even realize.
Right. And it's not just about memorizing facts. The book explores the different types of memory, like short-term memory, long-term memory, and working memory.
It's like our brains have different filing cabinets for different types of information.
That's a great analogy. Short-term memory is like the RAM in a computer. It holds information temporarily while we're using it. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is like our hard drive. It's where we store all of our knowledge, skills, and experiences.
And working memory is like that mental workspace where we actively process and integrate information from both short-term and long-term memory.
Precisely. And Learn therapy really emphasizes how crucial working memory is for learning. It allows us to hold multiple pieces of information in our minds at the same time, so we can solve problems, make decisions, and understand complex concepts.
It's like the mental juggling act we're constantly doing when we're learning new things.
Exactly. And the book goes on to suggest some practical strategies for improving memory, like using mnemonic devices, chunking information into smaller bits, and practicing spaced repetition.
I've heard of those before, but I'm curious to hear the book's take on them.
It explains why these techniques are so effective by delving into the underlying brain mechanism.
So it's not just about the techniques themselves, but about understanding the science behind why they work. It gives us a deeper appreciation for how our brains function and how we can leverage that knowledge to improve our learning.
Exactly. That deeper understanding can be really empowering. It helps us become more active participants in our own learning journey. It really is. And one of the big takeaways from Die-Learn therapy is that it's not about being a passive learner, just soaking up information like a sponge.
So it's more about taking charge of the process.
Exactly. It encourages us to understand our strengths and weaknesses, try different approaches to learning, and become more active participants in our own learning journey.
It's about becoming a lifelong learner, always curious, always seeking out new knowledge and experiences.
That's it. The book reminds us that learning isn't always easy, it can be challenging, but the rewards are worth it. It's about embracing those challenges, celebrating the successes, and finding joy in the whole process of discovering and growing.
It's making me think about all the different things that affect how we learn. We've already talked about the brain, emotions, sleep, exercise.
And Die-Learn therapy doesn't stop there. It even touches on things like nutrition and breathing techniques.
Really? I'm curious about that.
It emphasizes how important it is to give our brains the right fuel to nourish them so they can function at their best. A balanced diet full of all those essential nutrients can have a huge impact on our cognitive function, memory, and attention.
Makes sense. So it's not just about what we feed our minds, but also what we feed our bodies. What about the breathing techniques? I'm really intrigued by that.
Well, the book explains how deep, conscious breathing can actually help regulate our nervous systems.
Really, just from breathing.
Yeah. It can reduce stress and help us relax, which is super important for learning. The book even suggests some specific breathing exercises that people can incorporate into their learning routines to improve their focus and concentration.
I've never thought about that before. It's amazing how something as simple as breathing can have such a powerful effect on our mental state.
It is. And it reminds us that we have a lot more control over our learning experiences than we might think.
That's empowering.
It is. And that brings us back to the power of emotions in learning. Remember how we talked about the limbic system earlier?
Yeah, the emotional part of the brain.
Right. Well, Die-Learn therapy, it goes a step further and explains how emotions aren't just feelings. They're powerful drivers of behavior, including our learning behavior.
So our emotions can actually influence how well we learn.
Absolutely. The book talks about this close connection between the amygdala, which is the brain's emotional center, and the hippocampus, which plays a key role in memory formation.
So if we experience a strong emotion during a learning experience, it's more likely that we'll remember that experience because of that emotion. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. It explains why we tend to have such vivid memories of events that were really emotionally charged, whether they were positive or negative.
Okay, that makes sense. But does that mean we should try to turn every learning experience into some kind of a emotional roller coaster?
Not necessarily. Die-Learn therapy stresses the importance of creating a learning environment that's positive and supportive, where learners feel safe and encouraged to explore and experiment without feeling anxious or stressed.
So it's about striking a balance, creating a space where people feel motivated to engage with the material, but not so overwhelmed or pressured that they shut down.
Right. And the book also highlights the importance of social connection in creating this positive learning environment. Learning with other people, sharing ideas, working on projects together, all of those things can make learning more fun and enjoyable.
And it makes you feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. It fosters a sense of belonging and community, which can boost motivation and engagement even further.
So it's not just about individual learning, but about recognizing that we learn from each other and that we're all part of a larger community of knowledge seekers.
Exactly. We all bring our own unique experiences and perspectives to the table, and that diversity can enrich the learning experience for everyone.
I like that. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, everything from the triune brain to the impact of emotions, the benefits of sleep and exercise, and the power of attention and motivation. It's amazing how much it goes into learning.
It really is. It's like we've been on this incredible journey exploring the fascinating world of our own minds.
And I hope this journey has sparked some curiosity and wonder for our listener.
I hope so too.
I hope so too. It makes you realize that we really have the power to shape our own learning experiences.
That's one of the things I love about Die-Learn therapy. It's so empowering and encourages you to take ownership of your learning, to be curious and try new things. It's not just about passively absorbing information.
So it's about becoming an active participant in your own learning journey, figuring out what works for you, experimenting with different strategies, and constantly seeking out new knowledge.
Exactly. And the book also emphasizes that learning doesn't have to be a chore. It can be fun.
Right. There's that joy of discovery, that aha moment when something finally clicks.
And those moments are so rewarding, aren't they? The book reminds us that learning might not always be easy. There will be challenges along the way, but those challenges are part of the process.
They make those aha moments even sweeter, right?
Absolutely. And we've talked about a lot of different aspects of learning already: the brain, emotions, sleep, exercise.
And even nutrition.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We were just talking about how Learn therapy emphasizes the importance of a balanced diet for optimal brain function.
It's like giving our brains the fuel they need to learn and grow.
Exactly. But there's one more thing I wanted to touch on: breathing techniques.
Breathing techniques.
For learning, yeah. The book explains how deep, conscious breathing can actually help regulate our nervous systems, reducing stress and promoting relaxation.
Interesting. So it's not just about feeding our bodies and minds the right things, but also about how we breathe.
Right. It's all connected. And the book even suggests specific breathing exercises that can be incorporated into learning routines to enhance focus and concentration. I know it sounds kind of strange, but
Oh, it makes sense. We've already seen how powerful something as simple as sleep can be for our learning. Why not breathing too?
exactly. And it all comes back to that idea of taking control of our learning experiences. We have more power than we realize to create the optimal conditions for learning.
That's a great reminder. It's not just about passively accepting whatever happens, but actively shaping our own learning journey.
And that brings us back to the importance of emotions in learning. Do you remember how we talked about the limbic system
The
earlier?
emotional center of the brain.
Yes.
Yes. It's amazing how emotions are tied to so many aspects of learning.
Right. And Learn therapy takes it a step further, explaining how emotions aren't just feelings, they're actually powerful drivers of behavior, including learning behavior.
So our emotions can influence how we approach learning, how motivated we are, how much effort we put in. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. The book talks about the connection between the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, and the hippocampus, which plays a key role in memory formation.
Oh, wow. So that means that if we experience strong emotions during a learning experience, those emotions will actually make the memory of that experience stronger.
Precisely. It explains why we often have such vivid memories of events that were emotionally charged. Think about a time when you were really excited to learn something new.
Or a time when you were really frustrated and struggling to understand something.
Exactly. Those strong emotions, whether positive or negative, make the experience more memorable.
So should we try to make every learning experience an emotional roller coaster?
Not necessarily. While emotions are powerful, Learn therapy stresses the importance of fostering a positive and supportive learning environment. Learners should feel safe and encouraged to explore and experiment without feeling anxious or stressed. It's about minimizing those negative emotions that can hinder learning and promoting feelings of curiosity, interest, and enjoyment.
It sounds like it's about finding that balance, a
Mhm.
space where people feel challenged and motivated, but not overwhelmed or threatened.
Right. And the book also highlights the importance of social connections in creating that positive learning environment. Learning with others, sharing ideas, working on projects together, it can all make learning more fun and engaging.
It's also about that sense of belonging, right? Knowing you're not alone in this journey, that you're part of a community of people who are also eager to learn and grow.
Exactly. We all bring our own unique experiences and perspectives to the table, and that diversity enriches the learning process for everyone involved. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the triune brain model to the impact of emotions, the benefits of sleep and exercise, and the power of attention and motivation. It's amazing how much goes into learning.
It is. It's like we've been on this incredible journey exploring the fascinating world of our own minds.
Exactly. And I hope this deep dive has given our listeners a new appreciation for the complexity of learning and inspired them to take a more active role in their own learning adventures.
Me too. Learning isn't just about memorizing facts or passing tests. It's about growth, discovery, and the joy of expanding our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's about becoming lifelong learners, constantly seeking out new knowledge and experiences. And remember, learning should be fun. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never stop learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.